So, the task of comparing poetry is the most popular and frequently asked question in CIE examination. In the exam, you will be asked to compare two or more of the poems from the anthology we already discussed. In order to remember or understand the main goal of comparing poetry is this. You need to explore the relationship and the comparison within and between texts, selecting and evaluating relevant materials. Let me explain a little bit further. When it says the relationship and the comparisons, what you need to do is to look for the links between the themes and technique, the linking between poem number 1 and poem number 2. The link between these two poems may address the similarities or the difference between the themes and the technique. The second part of the objective task in comparing poems is the selection and the evaluation of the relevant material. Basically, it's the language and the style or the techniques that you need to evaluate. I guess in this part I have stressed over and over again. It basically tries to tell you that you need to use quotes to support your points. But you have to be careful. You have to make sure they are relevant. Relevant to the point you are making, or else your statement or your point will make no sense at all. Let's take a look at the examples that appear on the screen in front of you. Take a look at the first example. The relationship between the writer Iris and the peacock has a similar theme or common theme of nature. There's no doubt about the three poems that has the element of nature, because the language used does reflect that. In this second example, the poem Hey and 3rd November 1984 share the common theme of human experience. Readers will find out that these both poems shares a certain tone of frustration or mocking tone. However, one can also link two poems or three by looking at the techniques alone. The example given for this is Swami Anand and The Door Are Always Open. One may argue that both of these poems are using the imagery of nature to show the notion of experience and identity. One example of techniques that's often being used by poets is the technique of imagery or symbols. The peacock and the iris indeed uses the imagery and the symbols of colors. The similarities of both of these poems uses the technique of imagery and symbols is to achieve that mysterious tone. So, what does it mean to compare? The keywords here are similarities and differences. All you need to do is to look closely at the similarities and the differences between the use of themes and techniques used by the poet himself or herself. There's one example that shows you how to construct an essay which explores not only the similarities but the differences of the themes and techniques. You agree with me that the writer and the peacock shares the common theme of nature. Although you have that similarities in terms of themes, if you look closely, it has a lot of differences. In the writer, the poet uses the imagery of the surroundings, the animal kingdoms, and the plants to depict the loss of such beautiful natural order of nature if one destroy it by writing it down on dry flat paper. But if you look in the peacock, although it shares the same theme of nature, but it addresses a different issue all around. Bear in mind the technique used by the poet is also different. In contrast to the writer, which uses the imageries of flora and fauna to depict the destruction of nature and the repercussion of it, the peacock uses the figurative language of metaphor to represent the rare but worthwhile opportunity that comes unannounced to people. Even before you answer a question that requires you to compare poems, it's best that you plan your essay ahead before writing it. List down the similarities of poem 1 and poem 2 and then move on to compare the differences between poem 1 and poem 2. By doing so, your essay will be well structured and also helps you to avoid writing things you already have written, repetitions, and redundant ideas.